The crisis we're facing is at least as big as the last great global crisis, which was the rise of the Axis powers. And it requires a response at least as big if we're to prevent it from wiping out hundreds of millions of people. That's what runaway climate change will do. It will kill hundreds of millions of people, far more people than Hitler and his allies killed. If people had put their own immediate selfish interests ahead of the national interests during the Second World War, we would have lost. But at the moment, people are saying, how dare you even suggest that I can't have a plasma screen TV the size of a football pitch? How dare you even suggest that I can't fly to Thailand for my holidays? I refuse to give these things up. They are my fundamental rights. Have we become so soft and so selfish that we can't lay those down? When during the last great crisis, people were asked to lay down not their plasma screen TVs and their holidays to Thailand, but their lives? Have we become so soft and so selfish that we are asking other people to lay down their lives in other countries and in future generations so that we can maintain these plasma screen TVs and these holidays to Thailand? If so, it casts us in a pretty grim light. Morality before climate change is a pretty simple matter. You treat your friends and your neighbours and your associates as kindly as you can. Morality with climate change becomes much more complex because so many of the things which we regarded as morally neutral or in fact morally good also turn out to be morally bad. And by morally bad, I mean harmful to other people. So, for example, your sister is getting married in Sydney and it is a morally good thing to go to her wedding. It would be terrible if you didn't go because she would be really upset. You'd be hurting her by not going, and so it would be immoral not to go. Climate change says it's also immoral to go because by flying to Sydney from the United Kingdom, for example, you are going to be creating several tons of carbon emissions, and those will be contributing to displacing and killing people in other parts of the world as a result of climate change. So we see two perfectly valid moral codes in irreconcilable antagonism here. We want to have it all. We want to have our holidays in the sun, our huge car in the drive, our plasma screen TV the size of Belgium. We want all of these wonderful things, and we want a clear conscience. We want to believe we're on the side of the angels even when we're indulging in all these destructive activities, even when we're indulging in activities which are not just going to kill people in the future, they are killing people now. According to the World Health Organization, 150,000 a year as a result of climate change, and that number will get bigger and bigger as time goes on. And governments know this. They know that we want two completely different things. And so they recognize that what we want them to do is to talk about climate change, to talk a lot about what they're doing and about make extravagant promises about how they're going to curtail our emissions, but not to do it. Because if they were to do it, then the party's over. Something I've noticed is an extraordinary transition that's taken place in many people's minds over the past few years. To begin with, they were in complete denial about climate change and they wouldn't hear it. Whatever you said, whatever evidence you put forward, people would just shut it out. And they would put their hands in their ears and shut their eyes and sing loudly if you tried to explain what was going on. And then suddenly, many of those same people go from that position to the position of saying, oh my God, it's terrible, it's awful, there's nothing whatever we can do. And it's exactly the same position because it's a denial of responsibility. And despair is just as bad as denial, and it has exactly the same implications in that nothing happens if people despair. But somehow they manage to miss out the middle position, which is to say, yes, it's happening, yes, it's awful, and something can be done about it, and I'm going to do something about it. Because that requires responsibility, that requires action, that requires that people actually take power into their own hands, which is always something that people find difficult, but it has to be done. And because there is so little time and such a huge task, every single thing that people do is going to be significant. And people have the opportunity here to do things more significant than anyone's been able to do for thousands of years. the very fact that the crisis is taking place within our generation, that it's happening right now, means that we are tremendously powerful people. We have power over the future of the world for a very long time to come. So this position of despair and I can't do anything and there's no point is completely illogical. It's exactly the opposite. That you have this enormous power in your hands. You can do more than anybody has ever been able to do about something, and certainly more than anybody ever will be able to do about something, because in the future it will be too late. When you comprehend the scale of this problem, it's staggering to see how passive we've been about it, how little we have done to try to stop it. Where's the direct action? Where are the vast protests and the demonstrations? There are a few very brave people who have been doing things like this, but they are very poorly supported by the population as a whole. We're fast asleep. We're sleepwalking into this catastrophe. And unless far more people wake up, we're going to find ourselves in the midst of it when we all wake up, and it'll be too late. It is an odd thing, but most of the environmentalists I meet, and in fact an awful lot of the human rights campaigners as well, are very happy people. They shouldn't be. I mean, they're constantly confronted with all the worst that is going on in the world. And I often ask myself, where does this happiness come from? And I think there are several sources, but I think one of the reasons is that we face our fears. We're not constantly haunted by some horrible dark thing that's going on that we don't want to look at. It's like having ghosts in your brain. It's sort of awful spectres which might come and get you. We turn around and we look at them and we find out just how bad it is and how bad it isn't. So we know what the size of the problem is and what the texture of the problem is. And then that allows us to work out what needs to be done about the problem. So even while looking at the worst, we can see where hope lies. The fundamental problem with the current economic system is that it relies upon continuous growth. And continuous growth in a finite planet becomes at some point impossible. Capitalism, with that perspective, looks rather like a pyramid scheme, a system whose apparent health today relies on unsecured loans from the future. There are two separate timescales here. The first is the immediate emergency timescale. We have to stop runaway climate change. That means we have to stop more than 2 degrees of global warming, and that requires a crash program of cuts in greenhouse gases. And you can't wait until you've destroyed capitalism in order to bring that program about. You have to start from where we are, even though where we are is not a very good place to start. But in the longer term, it's hard to see how you can achieve anything remotely resembling long-term sustainable solutions if at the same time you've got growth continually pushing up behind and ensuring that your use of resources and your creation of pollution is just going to keep rising. It's inevitable that those two aims are going to clash. So the question then becomes, well, what do we do about capitalism? We're supposed to be 18 times richer by the end of the century than we are today. Where's that 18 times more money going to go? Are we all going to have Olympic-sized swimming pools? Are we all going to have 6 cars in the drive? Are we all going to be flying off every weekend? In which case, where do you put the airports? Where do you put the roads? Where's all the land required to suck up this massive amount of wealth? And you can see very clearly that beyond a certain point, wealth becomes a cause of deprivation. We have reached that point. We have reached the point of maximum welfare already. Beyond that, the optimum economic growth is surpassed and our welfare plainly declines beyond that point. And so we have to say, stop. But governments, no one in government is talking about that. No one is saying that we should stop. No one is saying that we'll even ever reach a point where we have to stop. It's almost impossible in the long run to stop climate change if the size of your economy is growing and growing and growing, especially in the rich world economies where we've already had all our basic needs answered. In the poor world, of course, there's still room for growth. There's a lot of development required in many countries. But here, We don't need more growth. And the fundamental problem that governments have got is that they keep promising to increase economic growth while at the same time promising to cut carbon emissions, and the two aims are running directly counter to each other. Tony Blair admitted the political timescale is out of sync with the environmental timescale. They're just operating on completely different scales because in politics a week is a very long time. 4 to 5 years is a maximum time because that's the period between elections, whereas the decisions you can be making today will have an impact in 30, 50, 100 years' time. And yet, of course, you won't be held to account for those decisions because you'll be dead, or at the very least you'll be out of office. And so politicians are very aware of this. They're very aware that to stay in power, they must bribe the population with things which will be damaging for future populations, or indeed are already damaging for populations elsewhere in the world. And in fact, the whole colonial model for a very long time has been built on this idea of extracting resources from one place, or indeed from one time, and concentrating them in the current place and time in order to buy political favours. And that's been the basis of our extractive overseas economy for a very long time. It's also currently the basis of our extractive domestic economy, that we favour the present and we favour the geographically immediate at the cost of everybody else, elsewhere and in the future. Climate change is not going to be stopped by people taking individual action. The only system which is going to work is one which imposes the same constraints upon everybody and brings down the ecological space that people can use year on year. And that's a carbon cap for the whole economy. And that cap should be set by deciding how much carbon dioxide the biosphere can absorb and dividing that equally amongst all the people on Earth, so that a nation gets a carbon allocation according to the number of people in it. We all have equal rights to pollute. That's the only fair way in which this can be dealt with. Having then made that allocation, that becomes the basis of a carbon ration, which comes down every year, gets smaller and smaller as you head towards the point that you need to reach. And that carbon is allocated equally to everybody. If you use more than your carbon ration, you can buy surplus from someone who uses less, but the price is going to get pretty high if everybody's trying to use more than their carbon ration, or if a lot of people are trying to. And so it becomes a self-regulating system in that respect. There's a major transfer of wealth under that system from the rich to the poor. There's also a very powerful incentive for people to invest in environmentally friendly technologies. So for instance, you want to keep your lights on, you don't want to use up all your carbon ration, so you're going to buy eco-friendly light bulbs and you're going to buy your electricity from someone who produces renewable energy. Not a week or a month goes by without someone sending me a design for what is in effect a perpetual motion machine. They're either just producing energy from nothing, or from cosmic rays, or from cold water, or whatever it might be. And they claim that this is going to be the answer to climate change. And I haven't given a single talk over the past 2 years without someone standing up at the end and saying, but what about this fantastic technological solution which is just around the corner, which is going to be the answer to all our woes? These hopeful monsters, these ideas of things which might one day materialise, most of which turn out to be complete nonsense, but these things are one of the impediments to taking action on climate change. All the technologies we require already exist. The constraint is not technological, it is political. It's that we're not making use of them. And sure, we should keep investigating and keep exploring and keep discovering, and we might find even better ones in the future, but something which doesn't exist today will be too late by the time it materialises. We have to work with what we've got, and we've already got everything that we need. Humans are inherently selfish. Humans are inherently altruistic. We have a huge range of potentials and capacities. We are very, very good at being unspeakably horrible and cruel to other people, and we're very, very good at being extraordinarily loving and kind towards other people. Unfortunately, many of the people who are unspeakably horrible are the ones who've got to the top. And there's quite a lot of work showing that a lot of business leaders and politicians fit the profile of psychopaths. Of course, people who are loving and altruistic and kind generally aren't massively ambitious because they're already quite happy with what they've got, but they also see that they should be looking after their Asian mother or their baby or whatever it might be, rather than going off and conquering places and torturing people to death or doing all the horrible things which psychopaths might do. And so there's no doubt that by and large the selfish people have trampled over the more altruistic people. So it's not that we are as a species inherently bad. It's simply that the bad traits are allowed to outcompete the good traits. We have to turn that around.